Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. Sorry about the wrong YouTube video. I just clicked the wrong button, and it just made an error, and I stopped it, and I couldn't refresh that URL in StreamYard, and so I just basically had to make a whole nother StreamYard video again. And usually, when you're rushed like that, you make mistakes. But it was quite a simple error. But yeah, hopefully people will be able to navigate to here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start going through this article by Christopher Yetzer. So Christopher Yetzer, he has written about Scrivener's 60 list. Okay. So this is sort of similar to an article, I guess I probably started it about 15 years ago. And I've just sort of been dribbling through it over the years. 190 variations in Scrivener's 1881 Greek New Testament from Beza's 1598 Textus Receptus. And so I have his appendix that's at the back of his edition of the Textus Receptus there. And I go through meticulously through these issues, and I show where there are issues with Scrivener's notes, Scrivener's text, and we look at and examine Beza's notes and text, and we also look at the King James. And so some of these I've got lots of information, some of these I've just got a tiny bit, but he does, in his appendix, he does have this list at the back of Latin. Okay. Now, I might get the slide beforehand. So this is at the end of his original Textus Receptus. So it says, the text of Beza 1598 has been left unchanged, where the variation from it made in the authorized version is not countenanced by an early edition of the Greek. In the following places, the Latin Vulgate appears to have been the authority adopted and in preference to, let me just get this other page up, Beza. So this is a claim by Scrivener. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, so because this is part 2, Scrivener is not really a friend of the Textus Receptus. He's not really a friend of our position of even the King James. He was a contemporary with Westcott and Hort. If you read his material, he wanted to delete lots and lots of verses. He doesn't like 1 John 5:7. Now, today, if we're sitting here and someone says, hey, I don't believe in 1 John 5:7, we don't usually account that they're like true Textus Receptus people or King James people, whatever you label you go under. We usually say, well, okay, well, they might be a majority text or something like that. There's many places where he wanted to delete the text. And so he is working on the revised version with Westcott and Hort. And so this is one of the things that I've brought up over the years, that Scrivener is not a friend of the Textus Receptus. Now, just because he produced an edition, which is basically Beza's 1598. Now, what I'll do, I'll just quickly explain what Beza's text is, what Scrivener's text is, because there's so much misinformation. And I know I'm getting quite a lot of new people coming on the channel and just saying, hey, I've tuned in. And sometimes things can go over their head when I'm explaining things. And so if you go back through a lot of my videos, sometimes I explain things over and over and over, like every video. It's just the way, the nature of this topic is that some people tune in for a little while, they grab a few bits of information and they run. But at the end of the day, I really want them to get this and understand this point. So basically, the Textus Receptus was it's a retroactive label upon all the Greek texts of the Reformation. That would probably include the Complutensian Polyglot, but definitely the 5 editions of Erasmus. There's a few minor editions done by other people, but then there's Stephanus, he did 4 editions, and Beza did 5 major editions. And so the King James translators, they used the 1598 Textus Receptus of Theodore Beza. Now, after the King James was done, 1524 and 1533, the Elzevers, they were an uncle and nephew. They weren't brothers, by the way. The Elzevers, they worked on the text, and they did their own edition of the TR. Now, if you look at any of those editions of the Textus Receptus, there are going to be differences. People like James White, he makes much ado of this and goes, there's differences in the text. It's like, yeah. So now the label Textus Receptus was put upon all of those texts later on, because really the differences aren't huge. They're enough for us to go, okay, we prefer the 1598 text. It's enough for us to go, okay, well, I don't go with that reading of Erasmus here or Stephanus here. The vast majority of what the King James translators used was the 1598 of Theodore Beza, okay? So I've estimated, according to my research, which is the one that I just had up, I've estimated that there is about a 10%, about 10% of what is labeled here in the or what is amended by Scrivener's 1881 Textus Receptus edition. The differences between that and Beza's, that there's probably about 20 differences. Okay, so most of these are not translatable. So if we were to, I'll just go to a random one. I won't go to something that's too complicated. Like, look at this. This is just a rough breathing or a smooth breathing. And so when we look here, the King James, it's just Jeremiah. So it's just the name of Jeremiah. Now, whether it's a rough breathing or a smooth breathing, in the rules to the translators, they were to use the names commonly used in England at the time. So if it says Paulos, they're going to translate it as Paul, not as Paulos. Jeremiah is not going to be Jeremiah. It's not going to be transliterated or Jeremiah, a smooth breathing or a rough breathing. They are just simply going to they're simply going to have the name Jeremiah, okay, or sometimes Jeremy, which they had every now and then. And so, yeah, here we see the King James. It says Jeremy, which is, we would say Jeremy, or we would say that's Jeremiah, okay. And so that's just the way that it was known. 1611, everyone knew that name. It was the most common way of saying it, and that's how the King James were to use those names, okay. And so basically, when you look at Scrivener's text, Scrivener, he has a little asterisk in his TR. He has 190 of these places, and it's to do with this little breathing mark here. So you have, in Greek, you have the rough breathing, which is like you have either the aspirated, you have the H sound or the silent sound. So it can be o or hot, like this. And so when we look at Theodore Beza's text, Theodore Beza's text is has the breathing mark the other way, okay, and so it's not going to break the bank, you know what I mean? It's almost completely untranslatable, and this is one of his issues. And then oftentimes these things are repeated throughout his list. So this might be a bee in his bonnet, and he's got this issue 3 or 4 times. And so Isaiah is written like this in the Greek, but it's just, you're either got a smooth breathing or a rough breathing. And so like this word ice here usually means into, or it can mean like a particular thing. And so here you have, lo, there came a certain ruler in Tyndale. Okay, so look at the difference in translation. Okay, here Scrivener's saying, well, I believe the King James followed this type of reading, which goes back to the Complutensian polyglot. Okay, but when you look at all the other texts that don't have it, they say exactly the same thing. Lo, there came a certain ruler, 1534 came a certain ruler, 35 came a certain ruler, 40 came a certain ruler, 49 came a certain ruler, 68 there came a certain ruler, 87 there came a certain ruler, 1611 there came a certain ruler. It's all identical. So how on earth would Scrivener just decide that this word, oh, well, that was in the King James, when obviously these were not following that reading. They were following the editions of Erasmus. They were following editions of Stephanus. And perhaps this one here, the bishops might have followed the Beza, but probably Stephanus. I'm not really sure about the main textual basis behind the bishop's Bible. But they definitely didn't need this ice word here. And so this is the type of thing that gets mentioned, and you can see in the annotations here where they talk about this. So the Vulgate having, this type of influence and all the rest of it. And so if you do want to know about all this stuff, and so basically I've got, why did Scrivener claim the King James Version follows the Complutensian reading when the above Bibles have the same reading without following any Greek text with ice? Green, in his 1976 interlinear of Scrivener, has one above ice, but considers it unimportant. And the LITV translation on the side has, behold, coming up a ruler bowed before him. So he leaves the ice untranslated. In this interlinear Greek New Testament, or in his interlinear Greek New Testament third edition, he has, behold, coming one ruler worshipped him, and ice has one above it. So Zod Haetes and the online Bible both have ice, meaning a certain. Okay, so basically Scrivener's just overstepped. And the thing is, the way that I view Scrivener is not the brains behind the Textus Receptus. Scrivener basically copied Beza's text and put it's sort of like he got the winning horse, sat on it, and he's the new jockey. and it's like, oh, he must have won the race. And it's like, no, he's just a new guy sitting on this horse. Or it's sort of like, same person, different haircut, that this is how I like to explain it. Theodore Beza, he is the one who did all the hard yards. He went all through Erasmus, all through Stephanus. He carried that baton from Stephanus. Henry Stephanus, Robert Stephanus' son, he did his own Greek editions, but mostly he was printing Theodore Beza's material. And so he carried that baton from the Stephanus print shop, and they were printing Beza's stuff. He took over from Calvin. So he was basically the main guy in Europe. He was the one who did the main Latin Bible that lasted for about 300 years with Junius and Tremellius. And so Junius, he was the expert in Latin. Tremellius, he was a Hebrew guy who got converted to Christianity, fluent in Hebrew, and did a Syriac Bible in 1569. So these guys knew each other. They were contemporaries, and they worked on a Latin text, which was the main Latin text for the Protestant church for about 300 years. Okay, and that text would be roundabout akin to the King James. It would probably be like a bishop's Bible sort of thing, but in Latin, if you were to translate it across. And so, so Theodore Beza, he did all that homework. He's brilliant in Latin, brilliant in Greek, knows his stuff. And so this is how I like to describe it. He went out, he hunted the animal down, he killed the animal, he skinned the animal, he cut it up into its sections, he roasted it, he cooked all the vegetables with it, he's marinated it, he's done all the hard work. And then 250 years later, you have Scrivener coming along. He's working with occultists like George Van Smith, who's a Unitarian, who doesn't believe in the deity of Christ, doesn't believe in the Trinity, writes against it. He's a Unitarian. You know, back in those days, they were basically like Jehovah's Witnesses. And him, Westcott and Hort, and Scrivener, they're working together with a bunch of other people, some of them heretics, some of them Unitarians, and Ezra Abbott, Unitarian, Thayer, Unitarian, and they're producing this Westcott and Hort text, a never seen before text, and they produce that. And the thing is, Scrivener is not, and he's not faithful to the Textus Receptus. He's not faithful to the King James Version. He knows a lot about it. So it's a bit like you might get people who write books about the King James, but they don't really even like it. But they say, I love the King, it's like Mark Ward sort of thing. I love the King James, and they talk a lot and lots about it, but they actually are undermining it every step of the way. And so basically what they wanted to do was they wanted to put all the changes that happened in Greek in the margin of the revised version of Westcott and Hort so people could see where there were departures in the Greek text, let alone in the English. That's a whole nother thing. Most of the time we're just talking about departures in Greek. If you just read the English of the revised version and compare it, even where the Greek's not changed, it's atrocious. But there was supposed to go in the margin, but there was so many. Even today, the Nestle Alarm text departs 2,900 times. There's omissions. So there's 2,900 less Greek words in the NA28. There's 8,000 changes. So it's a lot. So imagine having your margin just clogged up with these. And I guess that's why the New King James has 40,000 marginal notes. It's all over the place, and they don't include everything. I've gone through it doing translation work to find where there's places that are changed. It's sort of like retroactively using their material to make sure I'm not making that same type of mistake. And sometimes they just overlook an issue that's big to me. It's big to TR people, but they don't even put it in the margin, which is a sloppy scholarship. But anyway, that's a whole nother issue. But so they realized that the margin was going to be too filled with information. So they just said to Scrivener, look, why don't you just get the Greek of the authorized version, and we'll put our Greek side by side, and we'll underline it, or we'll bolden it, and we'll show where there's differences. And so that's why Westcott and Hort, they did what they did. Scrivener was told to do this by Ellicott. Basically, the Westcott and Hort Translation Committee, they've voted on this and said, let's do it. Who do we vote in? Well, Scrivener knows a lot about the King James. He wants to delete like 40 verses or something. He's read through it. Let's let him do this work. So he jumps on the TR project, and by 1880, at Christmas time, he's written the preface to it. And basically, he's got this list of 190 places where he feels that the King James guys went to the Latin, all the common ridiculous things that get spoken about today, or where there's departures and all this stuff. Now, Beezer did all the work. Okay, Scrivener just came along and basically printed it, and a few places here and there where he, like this one, where it's just completely unnecessary to put a change there, he changed it. Now, when people say to me, what Textus Receptus do you follow? I say, I follow the underlying Greek text of the King James Version. I believe that the King James translators not only just did a brilliant job at translating, but they also culminated all the knowledge of Scripture at that time. It was a bit like a bibliology conference that went for years. And so they were examining everything. And so let me just prove that to you. If you go to Google and you type in dedication to King James, see, a lot of people talk about the translators to the reader, and there's so much in that I could go through as well. But this one here just shows you exactly what they went to, okay? Because Some people try and make out, they only went to the Bishop's Bible, the 1602 Bishops, or they only used printed editions of the Greek text. James White says that almost every time he opens his mouth about this topic. So listen to what the King James translators said themselves. They're talking to James, and it says, "For when your highness had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that out of the first original sacred tongue," so it is a translation. People say it's not even a version, it's not even a translation, it's a revision of the Bishop's Bible. No, it says they went to the original sacred tongues. Even the front of the Bible says translated out of the original Greek and Hebrew. So it is a translation. Just because they utilized everything that was before them doesn't mean that it's just a revision. You know what I'm saying? So there are parts of it that are revised, but they went specifically to the Greek and Hebrew. So listen to this. That's the first thing, the Greek and Hebrew, together with comparing of the labors, listen to this, both of our own, so that's English. They went to all the English Bibles and other foreign languages. So they went to the German, they went to the Finnish, they went to the Dutch, they went to everything. They looked at everything, because it doesn't say some other foreign, it's all of the foreign languages. And this is mentioned in the preface, where it says they went to the many different, the French, the Dutch, they went to all these Bibles as well. And so not only were they basically doing a translation, they were using the Bishop's Bible as a draft. So it's just like a skeleton to work on, which is brilliant, because you don't just want to reinvent the wheel. If you've already got something that's functional and good, you work on that. You don't just reinvent things from ground up. But together with comparing the labors of both of our own, so they went through all the English Bibles, and then they went through all the foreign language material. Now, having done all that, they only did about 20 translatable differences from Beza to their version in the New Testament. So really what they're doing is they're taking their head off to Beza, saying, you did a brilliant job. There's only about 20 places. We've got 60 translators, 60 of the world's best scholars at the moment working on this project. We've gone through your material. There's only about 20 places that we find where there's a tiny little bit that we're like, look, we think Beza did a brilliant job, but we're amending that. And you can tell, according to their translation choices, where they did that. So let me show you one example of this. If we go down to John. Now, the difference is John 8:6. If you go to John 7, I think it's 49, and then you go to John 8:11, in the modern Bibles, it's all bracketed, and it says this doesn't even exist. These 12 verses are deleted. They should be deleted. And people call them Gnostic, and people call them apocryphal, and the woman caught in adultery story. But here we have a normal sort of situation in a TR thing, where you have two Greek words that are not in Beza, okay? But he does have them in the margin. So this is the issue. Beza knew about it. Beza talked about it, and it's in the Complutensian polyglot. So this is the sort of work that Scrivener should have done, these 20 places. Now, he went through and did a whole bunch of other stuff elsewhere, and it wasn't really that necessary. Some of it was, some of it wasn't. But it basically, what you see, like I was talking about that example of Beza, he went out and killed the animal. He marinated it. He cut it up into pieces. He cooked the whole thing, and he's chopped it all up. He's the main chef. He served it all up, ready to be eaten. And then Scrivener's like the waiter. He's just come up with Beza's meal that he's worked so hard on, put it on the table. And that guy puts the salt down his arm like this. Scrivener did that. He had 190 pieces, okay? He went like that. Now, it was like 170 of it is like pepper that you don't really like. So when you bite it, you're like, a bit of pepper. But the other 20 places were salt. there was 20 places. So we're talking about, there's 160 chapters in the New Testament. So we're talking about hardly anything here. And so I think it's like one change in every 11 chapters. Is that right? Someone can do the math for me. But Beezer did all the work, and Scrivener is basically saying, okay, here's the text. Now, I don't think he did it and said, oh, it's all mine. He just amended it. Now, there are some places where he favors Westcott and Hort's readings, and he's saying, oh, this is sort of an error, and he's trying to sort of make out, well, we should have gone with, or the King James guys were following this sort of reading, but when you examine it, it's like, no, they weren't really. All the other Bibles say the same thing. So why are you trying to squeeze that in there? Because he was not a TR guy, and he was not as skilled as Beezer. He's not a Erasmus. He's not a Stephanus. He's not a Beezer. He's not one of the King James translators. He comes around later on, and he is poisoned by text criticism. He's there with Westcott and Hort. He's there with a Unitarian. Like, how much discernment do you have to have? Like, if I'm sitting here and I've got a Unitarian who doesn't believe in the Trinity, doesn't believe, Jesus is God. He's like a Jehovah's Witness. If I'm even doing a podcast with him, you go, Nick's lost it. This guy's doing Bible translation work with this guy. They're having communion with this heretic. So how much discernment do you think Scrivener has? I doubt the guy's even got one. I doubt that Daddy's even saved. He's an academic. Anyone who's hanging around weirdos and creeps, the spiritually perverse psychopaths. These are way worse than the people Jesus was dealing with. I mean, I understand if Jesus turns up on the scene and says, "Hey, I'm God," and it takes him a while to get it. But this guy was writing books of, Jesus is not God. The Father, Son, the Holy Spirit are not. That's not what we should believe. And the Communahenium, we should throw that out. And so that's a huge influence on all these people back then. If you had a friend who was doing a Bible study and he would invite a Jehovah's Witness to come and run it like every, third or fourth week, you'd be like, that's off the wall. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to listen to what they're saying. But they are the guys who produce the Westcott and Hort text. That's why James White's always trying to find a Trinitarian reading that they've squeezed back in, because they've taken so much of the Trinity out. When they squeeze something in, or some new fandangled way of looking at, Jesus in Jude 5. I mean, Jesus is Joshua. Maybe Joshua led them out instead of the Lord. Maybe it actually detracts from the text. But anyway, that's another issue. But I think you get the point. So here we have the brilliant King James translators went to everything. They looked at the original languages. They looked at the English. They looked at the foreign languages. And that's how they built their Bible. Okay. So basically, when you look at 1611 as like the end of a 7-year period of time where it's like a bibliology council, because people like James White are like, oh, when did they ever sit down and decide what's in and what's out and all the rest of it? You wouldn't get something as close to that as 1611 anyway. And you've got the most brilliant minds of that era. You've got people from all sorts of backgrounds involved with this. And so anyway, I think you get the point. I'm going to continue on with this Latin issue. So that's pretty much the thoughts on Scrivener. Now, if you do use Scrivener, like I said, if you were to translate that into English faithfully, like the King James translators did, the final amen on Ephesians is missing. Okay. You just write that back in. Like when you look at, say, even Jay Green, this is a 1996 edition of his interlinear. He just has a amen in there, but he's like, I'm following Scrivener. And so there are some really well-known places where people just go, sorry, Scrivener, I think you're wrong, because it follows a typo. So basically the amen was not in the 1611, but in 1613 or might be 1616, they actually put that back in. And like, I've probably got that information here on my site. Let's just have a quick look. So the Amen is in Beza. The Amen doesn't appear in the 1611, but it is put back in, and I haven't got the date there, because some of this I've written like 10, 15 years ago, so it's quite a long time ago. And I've sort of, oh yeah, here we go. Scrivener himself mentions that it is not in the Vulgate or the Clementine, but it's in the Authorized Version 1616 edition. So he admits it's in later on. But that they're like, no, we want you to only go with the 1611. And it's like, well, it's obviously a typo. It's fixed. Why would they fix it? Why would it, only a few years later they put the Amen there if it's not a correct reading? So obviously it is a correct reading. So anyway, let's shut those, or I'll keep that page open. Let's go to, I'll just shut my Facebook down. It's taking up all my bandwidth. And so, yes, Christopher Yetz's article. So yesterday we went through the article on the RVG website. So let's just have a quick look at these ones. So here's the article page of the Reina Valera Gomez Bible Society. Now, as far as I know, I don't speak Spanish, and so not many people speak Spanish around me. I was hanging out with some Argentinians, and they would speak Spanish, and we would go through some words. It was more just a fun thing to do. But as far as knowing Spanish, speaking Spanish, I don't have a clue. But as far as I know, just by trusting certain people who have done a lot of work into this, the Reina Valera Gomez is a good translation. It's accurate, and it would be considered akin to the Textus Receptus and the King James Version. So people like Will Kinney, he was a high school Spanish teacher, so obviously he knows his Spanish. He can speak fluently, and he has his opinions on it. D.A. Waite, he promoted this. And a lot of these guys come out of the Dean Burgon Society as well. The Dean Burgon Society has sort of, it's still running. I interviewed his name will come to me, Kurt DeVitro, and he is the main guy running the Dean Burgon Society. Phil Stringer used to be involved with that, a whole bunch of other guys. But I think some of the parameters of being involved with that were really quite narrow. And so some people, they got involved and they left, and other people that they're still hanging on in that. But this seems to have come out of that type of group. I'm not saying they're affiliated in any way. They seem independent. But Manny seems to be involved with the King James Bible Research Council as well, and does articles for them. And so his full name is Emmanuel Rodriguez. That's where I was getting caught yesterday. I was like, oh, Emmanuel, I'm pretty sure this guy's name is Manny, but realizing that that's short for that, and his Facebook handle is Manny. So so I'll quickly show you what I went through yesterday. This was the article, Calvin George falsely accuses the King James Version of departing from the Textus Receptus. So this Calvin George guy is saying, well, we have critical text readings in the Reina Valera of 1960, but the King James, they depart in the Latin. They have all this Latin stuff in their Bible. So this is basically talking about that. And so, and this Calvin George, he misquotes Jack Mormon and makes some other false claims. And so I went through that article. And so now I can shut that down. And he also has this article up by Christopher Yetzer, which is what I'm going to be reading through today, but I'm going to read it through from the academia page. So if you type in Scrivener's 60 by Christopher Yetzer in academia, academia.edu, you'll come to his main page. So I think this got put up a while back, but I think it's been expanded and corrected. So, and here, cool, you can actually download that, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if that's the academia page that it goes to, but sort of looks like it. But anyway, I would encourage you to get the academia one. Chris Yetzer contacted me this morning and said, if you're going to read through it, please use the academia one. It's more up to date. And that usually happens. I've written stuff and people are reading it online. I'm like, oh no, I haven't even proofread that. Or what part of my website is, it's like a Wikipedia type of thing. I'll get inspired to write something there, but it doesn't mean I know everything about the whole thing. I'm just putting a little bit of information. And sometimes I copy and paste things and it's got typos and I should have checked things, but it's late at night and you press save and then you move on and then someone's doing a whole thing on it. And you're like, so I'm glad that he pointed me in the right direction as to where there was the latest information. And no doubt, he'll probably go through that as the years go by and polish a few things here. So this is the article section for the Bible Society, the RVG Bible Society. And so I noticed I was tagged into this. So this is a response to my video that I did yesterday. So what I'll do, I'll just quickly read through this. A response to Nick Sayers' review on my article on the Latin readings in the King James Version. So I'll just read straight through it. I won't do any commentary, or I'll try not to divert, because I don't want to spend too much time reading. There's already going to be 34 pages of Christopher Yetzer's material, and it's study material, so it could take a while. So Emmanuel Rodriguez, 7 hours ago, a response to Nick Sayers' review of my article on Latin readings in the King James Version by Pastor Emmanuel Rodriguez. Nick Sayers is an intelligent defender of the King James Version. He is an author, but he is probably more known for doing lengthy videos on his YouTube channel, which you can find here, in which he meticulously reviews and critiques many arguments on both sides of the Bible version debate. He's very thorough and careful in his investigations. To the time of the writing of this response, his latest video was a review of one of my articles, which was recently posted on the website of the King James Bible Research Council. The article can be found on the KJV RC website here. The title of the article is Calvin George, so I won't bore you with all that. It's just saying the same stuff. The purpose of my article was to refute Calvin George's claim that the King James Version has departures from the Textus Receptus. I unapologetically take to task false narratives like this because Calvin George uses misinformation like this to justify critical text corruption in Spanish Bibles, especially the 1960 edition of the Reina Valera. His misinformation is leading too many good people astray, which is why I'm grateful that the work and influence of the Reina Valera Gomez Bible Society is growing and making an impact. Nick Sayers entitled his video, Did the Evil Latin Make Its Way into the Greek TR and English KJV? The video is posted below. The video review is over 3 hours long. People have complained about me being long-winded. Brother Sayers makes me feel better about that. All kidding aside, I appreciate his work. Brother Sayers supported the point of the article when multiple times he explained that this idea that anything being Latin-based is corrupt, Roman Catholic, and therefore evil is a common misconception. I pointed out in the article that Jerome's Latin Vulgate was not the only Latin source that the KJV translators were working with. They also had in front of them the good Textus Receptus Latin translations of Erasmus, Stephanus, who simply reproduce Erasmus's translation, and Beza. Therefore, Calvin George's claim that the sprinkling of Latin readings in the KJV were departures and false. I would just sort of correct that. The Stephanus, he actually did have the Erasmus 1527 edition, I think it was, or 1535. And he actually did do changes to the text. I know there was a video, I think it's by the King James Bible Research Council, on the Textus Receptus, sort of saying that Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza, it's the same text sort of thing. There are differences, and they can easily be pointed out. And so I was actually thinking of doing a video about that presentation, but that information could be from that presentation. But yeah, so I guess that would have to be something that's proven. Anyway, I don't want to depart from this too much, because we're getting into the tiny little minutia. And of course, when I'm not in contact with these guys all the time, and so of course they're coming from a completely different angle, I'm coming from a different angle, but we're coming to the same conclusions, which completely disproves the whole concept that we're in a King James cult. Who's our leader? And as if you're in a cult, you can critique what other people are saying, someone who's a leader or whatever, or you can just critique their work. You can go through and just say, oh, no, I think you're wrong here. I think you're right here. Great point here. No, that's, a critique is, it's not, in a cult, you don't do critiques. And that's the thing, like, we're free thinking people, just looking at the data and coming to the same conclusion that 1 + 1 = 2 instead of 3. And of course, when we get to these fine details, I mean, I've got people who I know really, really well, and we disagree, but we know the same information. So of course that type of thing is going to happen. As I mentioned in the article, anything that may had possibly been influenced by a consultation of Jerome's Latin Vulgate would not have conflicted with the collective evidence of the Textus Receptus. Thus, Latin-based readings in the King James Version are not departures from the TR. They are simply word choices that are Latin-based but in agreement with the TR, despite whatever differences in nuance word equivalents may have from one language to another. Anyone who is bilingual should know better, unless they have an agenda, which Calvin George clearly does. Mr. Sayers reinforces the argument with additional information from his own personal research. For example, I especially loved how he pointed out that Beza authored what became the definitive Latin translation used by the Reformers as their go-to text in Latin for about 300 years. This further demonstrates that what the King James Version had available to them in Latin to work with was not anything bad. I'm glad Brother Sayers brought that up, and I am now inspired to become more acquainted with Beza's Latin text. Dr. Lawrence Vance speaks a bit about Beza's Latin text in his latest book entitled The Text of the King James Bible. Another very good point that Mr. Sayers brought out is the need to put Jerome's Latin Vulgate in proper or better perspective. He points out that Jerome's Latin Vulgate is in its original form back in the 4th century was most likely not as bad as we think it is. It is a good point, and I probably should have included a statement regarding this in my article. For many years, KJV defenders have categorized Jerome's Latin text as bad since it became the official Latin Bible of the Roman Catholic Church. But as Brother Sayers mentioned in his video, the Roman Catholic Church did not really come to full development until about the 6th century. In other words, the Church of Rome back in Jerome's time was not what the Roman Catholic Church is today. Although the seeds of what the Roman Catholic Church would eventually become was sown as early as 325 AD with Constantine's Council of Nicaea, much of the heretical nature of the Roman Catholic Church has become infamous had not developed when Jerome was asked to provide a Bible for the Roman Church. A lot of the Latin-speaking Christians in the area would have benefited from Jerome's work, would have been pretty sound Christians at the time, albeit led astray later. Perhaps the most questionable thing about Jerome's Latin Bible was the inclusion of the apocryphal books throughout his text, and he actually put an asterisk next to all the apocryphal books because he didn't find those apocryphal books in the Hebrew And so outside of the apocryphal books, which we obviously disagree with, Jerome's Latin text in its original form was probably much more in agreement with the King James Version and the received text than we realize. Any corruptions that may be found in later editions of Jerome's Vulgate would have been the handiwork of the apostate Roman Catholic Church, probably many years after the death of Jerome. In fact, Dr. Hugh Houghton, a prominent Latin Bible researcher, but not a TR or KJV man of our stripe, acknowledges a theory among some Latin scholars that there was perhaps a complete Latin Bible translation containing all books of the Bible in circulation among the Latin-speaking churches back in the 3rd century. This theory is disputed among scholars, but it is possibly not that far-fetched. You can read about this in the first chapter of Dr. Houghton's book, The Latin New Testament, A Guide to its Early History Texts and Manuscripts. Having noted this, since the Latin Bible was well acquainted with back in his day, it is possible that Jerome's effort may not have been to really change much in the Latin Bible, other than the addition of the apocryphal books. The inclusion of the apocryphal books alone may have been enough to distinguish itself from other Latin Bibles in circulation at the time. But this is something I need to look into more. Right now, I'm just thinking out loud. Brother Sayers also pointed out that the Latin was such a common language for so many centuries that it really should not alarm anyone that many word choices in the King James Version were Latin influenced and Latin based. This is something that I've been trying to point out for years. Many languages are Latin based. Much of the English is Latin based. Of course, Reformation era Bible translators heavily considered Latin for word choices. There is nothing wrong with this. There is definitely nothing anti-TR about this. What a ridiculous notion to imply something negative just because it is Latin-based. To dismiss something simply because it is Latin-based is shallow and unscholarly. Many fail to realize the importance of Latin. They forget that the superscription on the cross, which mocked Christ for being the King of the Jews, was written in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Luke 23:38, demonstrating Latin's antiquity. I'm pretty sure that verse is deleted in the modern critical text. I might actually just quickly look it up. I know I said I wouldn't rabbit trail, but it's either there or it's in Matthew. But let's have a quick look. Yeah, notice in the King James here, it says there's a Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. And in the modern versions, it just says, which read, "This is the King of the Jews." They omit those. How's that? Just casually quoting something, and people who have an NIV would have gone, my Bible doesn't say that. You know, what utter confusion these modern Bibles bring. But let's continue. I found the history of the involvement of the Bible into Latin to be fascinating, and therefore I hope to look into the role of the Latin in Bible history more profoundly going forward. I believe such information is undervalued, yet extremely useful in the ongoing and controversial Bible version discussion. So I appreciate the commentary Brother Sayers added concerning the Latin Bible, which gives me more to chew on. Since Nick Sayers is an objective researcher, he also offered a friendly critique of some things in my article, for which I appreciate. For example, he questioned the prudence of going to the works of J.J. Ray and Benjamin Wilkinson. Wilkinson has been under fire for years by those on both sides of the fence because he was a Seventh-day Adventist, and therefore J.J. Ray has been under fire for perpetuating much of the same information presented by Wilkinson. I've been well aware of this for years. In fact, I wrote an article many years ago, which Dr. D.A. Waite published in the Dean Burgon Society website, on the Dean Burgon Society website, back when I was a member of the Dean Burgon Society, in which I addressed Wilkinson and the attempt by those opposing viewpoint to use against us. This article is entitled Guilt by Association, Arguments and the King James Version. You can read it there. Honestly, I also question whether or not I should quote Ray and Wilkinson when I wrote the article. In my defense, the reasons I did were twofold. First, part of the premise was to show how Calvin George was misrepresenting Dr. Jack Mormon concerning his statement on Latin readings in the King James Version. To do this, I wanted to allow Dr. Mormon to elaborate on his perspective on Latin readings in the King James Version. In Dr. Mormon's writing on this, he quotes Ray and Wilkinson, so I wanted to let Dr. Mormon's own perspective and the resources he used expose Calvin George's twisting of the information. So secondly, as questionable as Benjamin Wilkinson is for being a Seventh-day Adventist, and as wrong as his legalistic theology is, I believe his information concerning Latin Bibles is correct. That information was not a matter of theology, but one of history. Can someone who is unreliable in theology provide good information in regard to history? What exactly is the theology of many of the historians that we glean history from? Can I learn mathematics from someone who is wrong theologically? I appreciate Brother Sayers' comments in which he explains that the truth is still the truth no matter who says it. Although I do also agree with Sayers that it would probably be prudent to quote other sources who can give the same information so as not to give our opponents something they can exploit against us. I get that. Dr. Jack Mormon is now with the Lord. In his defense, I think it should be pointed out that much of the scrutiny of Benjamin Wilkinson was not quite as public and common back when he penned his excellent treatises on the defense of the King James Version. Dr. Mormon was a brilliant advocate of the King James Version. If he had access to the technologically advanced tools that we enjoy today, there's no telling how much more of an impact he would have made. A lot has been brought to light in this modern age of information access. And when I did my Easter article, my 2005 article on Easter being in the King James, I sent it to Jack Mormon because he had an article sort of saying it was a pagan festival on that. And he responded and said that he agreed with what I was saying and that I had advanced that particular issue for a lot further than had previously been mentioned. And so what I found was Jack Mormon, D.A. Waite, when they were provided with new information or just something a little bit different that was a bit more enlightening, they ran with it. Where I sent the same information to James White, he straight away called me a Ruckmanite. That's the first interaction I ever had with James White. And he said, "You're a Ruckmanite." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it shows you the difference in the spirit. You know, some people are teachable, and like what's being said here, it's like you can only go with the information that you're given. You can't. We're not prophets, or we profess, but we're not prophets in knowledge. You know, we're given a certain amount of light. If there's more light, when you're given new information, you should look into it. A lot of people just double down and just pretend the information is not there. It's not a good look. But so again, I repeat, however, that though there are better sources to quote from, the information is still correct. For example, I would consider Theodore Beza's attestation to the early existence of the Italic Church to be very reliable when looking back in history on how instrumental he was in the development of the TR, something which Wilkinson presents in his material. Nevertheless, I appreciate Brother Sayers' scrutiny of my article and other suggestions he made for how he perhaps would have worded a few things a little differently, were all respectfully noted. Sayers said some things that were very encouraging. I was happy to hear him use the word accurate towards the end of his assessment of the article, because seeing the meticulous way by which he scrutinized other works in other videos he has done, I'm sure that if there was anything inaccurate in my article, he would not have hesitated in pointing it out. He did say that there was a thing or two that he wanted to investigate more. I'll allow that inquisitiveness to hold my feet to the fire, to dig deeper as well. Perhaps what I appreciated the most were the following words verbatim of Nick Sayers. Emmanuel Rodriguez, he is the president of the Reina Valera Gomez Society. I listened to something of his recently, and I think these guys do a fantastic job. I really appreciate what these guys have done with the Spanish Bible. I think that is what we need, is more proactive Textus Receptus people. I actually didn't want to get into the situation where I'm constantly defending the Textus Receptus. I already settled it in my heart. It's like, okay, well, obviously It's the Textus Receptus. The King James is the best translation that you can get from the TR. And it's like, okay, let's move on. There are millions of people out there. They need Bibles. Let's do Bible translation work. Let's encourage people who are doing this. Let's promote Bibles in other languages. And so it's been my heart for years and years and years. What they've done in the Spanish is brilliant. And a lot of people are saying it's a great translation. And I think the thing is, too, these guys are constantly looking at things, looking at arguments for and against. And as time goes on, this will probably be one of the most important things that has happened in the Spanish-speaking world in the last, 200 years. And I know that people will go, oh, it's just a Bible translation. No, this is so important. That's how important I think this issue is, that the true Bible gets out there. Having these Bibles with errors and mistakes, this causes doubt, this causes confusion, and the well is poison. I appreciated his work of encouragement for the RVG Bible Society in response to the part of my article where I wrote Calvin George is not counting on people to think things through and scrutinize his false claims. We at the Reina Valera Gomez Bible Society are not going to let him get away with it. To this, Brother Sayers said, and good on you guys for doing this. Brother Sayers' comments demonstrate that people get it. These who are objective and honest, and especially those who are willing to do the research, see the importance of the sincerity of what we're trying to accomplish with the RVG Bible Society. The kids today say real recognizes real. God knows our hearts and our sincerest desire to simply get the pure words of God out there, not just in English, but in Spanish and every other language as well. It's all for God's glory and the well-being of his people. Thank you, Nick Sayers, for your objective commentary and scrutiny of the article. To anyone wanting to learn more about these important issues at a high level of understanding, I also recommend the work of Nick Sayers. Check out his YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Also, his website is a tremendous wealth of information, Textus-Receptus.com wiki main page. Okay, so I appreciate that. So I was tagged in that. I read that. I think it was like 5 o'clock this morning when I got up. I was like, oh, someone's tagged me, and read through it. And I thought it was very good. So thanks to Manny for that. So that sort of closes that section of the discussion. So we're going to move on to the Christopher Yetzer article. So let's just jump straight into this. Now, I've got 21 comments there waiting to be read, so I better quickly go through them. Hilly Billy is in the house. Hey, Nick, happy Sabbath. Thanks for stopping by today. I'll be in and out, kind of multitasking. Okay, good to see you, Hilly Billy. I'm sorry, Nick. Everyone must be out celebrating my birthday. That's why I only do it once a year. Too much of a distraction. A. Hannah says, I think you are giving Scrivener way too much credit for the salt thing. Basically, Scrivener, all he really did, I guess it's like he did a King James version, the Cambridge Paragraph Bible. I think it was in 1573 or something like that. And he has strain out in that instead of strain out in that. So he's not doing the translation work. He's trying to fix it. And obviously, if he's hanging around people like Westcott and Hort, he's got some strange concepts of how to fix things, So it's like just a mechanic who tinkers on your car. You might have the best car in the world, but, someone's just put Scrivener just put a spoiler on the back that looks ugly. And it's like, but, it's still the same car. It's just got this ugly spoiler on it. And you know what a spoiler is, the little, because I guess we have different language for certain things here in Australia. So at the back of the bonnet, how they have a little raised thing that some young guys put on, it makes it look like a race car. Okay, so A. Hannah says, Nick's on a roll. I really want him to get into Christopher Yetzer's article, letting him run free. So we've already chatted for 1 whole hour. Hilly Billy says, Nick's got this. I always tell my group to come and check him out. Mike is in the house and he says, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot, we see no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Yes. And I remember as a kid, we used to have Guy Fawkes night down in Melbourne, where we'd let off firecrackers and we'd have a fire and put a effigy thing there. And that was great. I don't think they do it anymore. It's probably not woke enough or politically correct, to do that. Hilly Billy says that's sort of like wearing women's undergarments. You might not want to admit it, but it doesn't change the facts. A. Hannah says it's August and Hilly's birthday. Hilly says, I always have my birthday around mid-August. I like the weather. Yep, you just choose to do that. A. Hannah says, intelligent, lengthy, started nice and honest. Yeah, A. Hannah, long-winded. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, I do get lots of complaints. People go, "Oh, it's 4 hours or 3 hours," and it's like, well, okay, if you don't want to tune into it, like the thing is, like, if there's something really long, like I guess some people don't have premium YouTube, where I do, and so premium YouTube, if I listen to something, it basically, if I cut it off an hour into it, when I tune back into that, it starts again at that point. So to me, it's like I can, I could do this in 5 different stages and, have it all worked out and all the rest of it. But I think it's just easier just to go through and just listen. And the thing is, when you're listening to it later, you can chuck it on 2.0. I listen, I go back through stuff that I've done if I need to check something or double check if I've said something correctly, and I'll go 2.0 and I get through these videos really quickly. I chuck James White on 2.0 now. I never used to be able to because he used to talk so fast, but he's slowing down a bit. Hilly Billy said, I had a military commander that loved to hear himself. We suffered through many aimless speeches. A. Hannah says, I believe that was the beauty of the military, long aimless speeches, a captive audience. Yeah, well, that's part of growing in patience. So I'm actually what you prayed for. Patience. Hilly says, there you go, A. Hannah. He's about to get Christopher next. If I get a bulldog, I'll name it Nick. 1 hour in, probably in 30 more minutes. Yeah. It's like, I'm an hour in, and then I waffle on for half an hour, and then it's like, okay, let's get started. Hel says, well, Yetzer is certainly an intelligent scholar, both heart and mind in the right place. Nice. Just like Nick says, well, I appreciate the like there and the likeness to Yetzer. I think the stuff that Christopher Yetzer does is underrated. And I was actually thinking this today. There's so many people on the Textus Receptus Academy page on Facebook that do good stuff. There's sometimes I just don't get time to get around to it. And even the Van Cleeks will do an article on something, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll look at that later. And the later is like months away, because I'm dealing with so much stuff and I'm so busy. But there's so much information there. And I guess it would be good to document a lot of this stuff more, to put this sort of stuff into my website under maybe Christopher Yetzer's articles, and just have links to them, or put them in. So if anyone talks about the Latin, we can just start here. We can go, here you go, read this. And because the thing is, a lot of these critical text guys are just simply not educated in these issues. They're half the time it's like, I've been King James only in some back blocks church or whatever. I've been King James only for 5 years, and just 3 years ago or 18 months ago I became critical text. I listened to Mark Ward and he was convincing, and so oftentimes they're not even grounded in King James material. They're just sprouting stuff that's sort of stuff that we would debunk, and then they're trying to tell us that we're all the same. And so oftentimes you're not really dealing with something that's sophisticated. Like even with James White stuff, I go through that now and I'm like, man, error. I think the latest video that I listened to the other day, it had so many errors in it. And he even mentioned me, Revelation 16:5, and he misrepresented me. He lied about me. I'm like, man, and he only talks about me a tiny bit. But it's like, this is what you get from James White. Hilly says he watches almost everything on 2 times. Yeah, me too. If I can, some people are hard to listen to. They talk too fast, and sometimes it's so detailed you have to slow it down. But usually, if you have to slow it down, it's probably going to be more interesting, more detail. Yetzer is definitely underrated. He needs to write a book. Yes, Hannah, or compile his writings in a book. Helg Evanson says we need more scholarship these days, more non-neo-evangelical scholarship. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's go through this article. Now, I might make this full screen just so we can all read it. And let's do this. Scrivener 60. This article critically examines the 60 passages identified by FHA Scrivener as instances where the Latin Vulgate appears to have been the authority adopted by the KJV translators in preference to Beza. So he's got footnotes here. So footnote number 1. Hopefully the footnotes appear at the bottom of the page. Yes, they do. So yes, it's just the book FHA Scrivener, New Testament in the original Greek. So that's the original Greek and the list that I was showing you earlier. And so that's great. It seeks to access the motivations behind the KJV translators' choices and evaluate the accuracy of Scrivener's claims. And so we're looking, are these claims true about the King James translators? Or is, Scrivener, is he accurate or inaccurate? So let's look at the background. In the introduction to FHA Scrivener's 1845 work, a supplement to the authorized version of the New Testament, he examined various readings in the King James Version, organizing his objectives into 3 categories. Number 1, errors of criticism arising from false readings of the Greek text. Number 2, errors of interpretation, which originate from mistaking the sense of the original Greek. And number 3, errors of expression, where the language of the English translation itself is ambiguous, ungrammatical, or obscure. And so that is footnote number 2, which is FHA Scrivener, a supplement to the authorized version of the New Testament. So that's in 1845. So reading the first category, Scrivener began to discuss the Greek sources used by the King James Version translators. On pages 7 and 8, he provides a short list of verses where the KJV translators followed Beza over Stephanus, and afterward a list of places where they followed Stephanus over Beza. However, in his work, he must have also encountered readings which he felt aligned with neither, leading to 4 verses being noted in which our version adopts a reading found neither in Stephen's nor Beza, in the last 2 cases on the authority of the Latin Vulgate. Footnote number 3, and it says Matthew 2:11. That's a classic, because I've done heaps of work into Matthew 2:11, and that's the one that Mark Ward always brings up. It's basically the edon or euron, and so saying that one means found and one means saw. But clearly, if you understand in other places in Scripture, basically it can mean discovered. Like if I'm in a boat and I saw Australia, I'm the first white guy to see Australia. It's like I discovered it, I saw it, and so they found it. Even places are called Newfoundland, and they haven't even landed there yet. They just looked at it. They're like, oh, we found this place, So anyway, that's Matthew 2:11, 10:10. So that would be the Rabdon issue, which is amazing that he's got this listed there. That's in 1845. So it shows you that even back then, I'm just having a cursory look at that. It's pretty lame. What he's saying is pretty lame. And so John 18:1, I'm not sure what that is. Acts 27:28. So we won't get into all that. We might be just studying through all these and going through all these verses, but they're all there for you just to check them out. So, so where were we? We were at, that one there. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1863, Brooke Foss Westcott included Scrivener's findings in a footnote in A Dictionary of the Bible by William Smith, expanding the list with additional passages where the King James Version followed neither Beza nor Stephanus. So that's footnote number 4. And so it's got the same type of things, but it's also got 2 Peter 1:1. I guess it's the Granville Sharp rule. Perhaps, I'm not sure, but we'll have to go through all that. I'm sure that these things will come up. Around a decade later, when Scrivener published the Cambridge Paragraph Bible, the CPB, he included in the introductory material an appendix of 131 passages subtitled "The Greek Text Adopted by the Translators of the Authorized Version of the New Testament." This appendix synthesized his previous research, Westcott's additions, and further material. It contained over 2 pages of passages where the King James Version followed Beza against Stephanus, and half a page where it followed Stephanus against Beza, and 29 examples of passages in which the text of the Authorized Version differs from those of Stephen's 1550 and Beza 1598. Footnote 5, and it's got a ton of verses there, and so the list of verses is growing. There were not just places where the KJV matched the Vulgate, but also places where other printed texts match readings in the King James Version. Footnote says only 3 verses of the list of 29 did not have previously printed Greek support: John 18:1, Ephesians 6:24, and 2 Timothy 1:18. Okay, so we're going to check all those out as well. This was where Scrivener's original list, along with the one example added by Westcott and others, were presented. Another decade later, Scrivener published the New Testament in the original Greek according to the text followed in the Authorized Version. Unlike his earlier projects, which focused on identifying the KJV's primary Greek bases, the work aimed to reconstruct all possible Greek readings underlying the King James Version. Starting with Beza's 1598 text, Scrivener examined 17 other printed editions of the Textus Receptus, inserting a variant reading into Beza's text whenever he found evidence that it matched better the reading of the 1611 printing of the King James Version. Footnote 7 has Complutensian 1514, Erasmus 1516, 19, 22, 27, and 35, Aldus 1518, Colonnaeus 1534, Stephanus 1546, 49, 50, and 51, Antwerp Polyglot, which is 1572, which is mostly Complutensian, Beza's 1560, 65, 82, 89, and 98. And so this is FHA Scrivener, New Testament in the original Greek according to the text followed in the Authorized Version, together with the variations adopted in the Revised Version. Cambridge University Press, 1881, page 648. Okay, so I'm saying the details because this is a detailed document, so we don't want to leave any details out. Since his purpose was different, his methods were different, and consequently the appendix was different. Instead of listing all variations between Beza and Stephanus, it documented only where Scrivener reconstructed text, where his reconstructed text diverged from Beza's 1598 edition, citing the supporting Greek sources for each variant. However, he still had a list of places where he could not find support in the previously printed Greek text, leading Scrivener to append the list to the end of the appendix with a note. So basically he has 190 places, and then he has this. The text of Beza 1598 has left much unchanged when the variation from it made in the authorized version is not countenanced by any earlier edition of the Greek. In the following places, the Latin Vulgate appears to have been the authority adopted in preference to Beza. This present list is probably quite incomplete, and a few cases seem precarious. So he's got footnote number 8, which is basically just the FHA Scrivener 1881 New Testament. And that was the one I showed earlier. This list of 60 suspected Vulgate-influenced readings was subsequently reprinted in various volumes, typically with the same introduction and content. However, in 1884, Scrivener included the list with a different introduction in the Authorized Edition of the English Bible 1611, its subsequent reprints and modern editions. Footnote 9 says this was the introductory material for the Cambridge Paragraph Bible. I think it says CBP, maybe that should be CPB, but reworked and printed separately. Okay, so let's continue. This list of 60 suspected, did I just read that? I think I did. Yes. Yeah, it's exactly what I just read. Yes. So, trying to keep my spot here. There, the list appeared at the end of a reworked Appendix E from the CPB, the Cambridge Paragraph Bible. So, yeah, in the footnote, I'll just point out to Chris Yetzer that needs amending. With the variant introduction, it may be useful to subjoin a list, probably quite an incomplete one, of places where the translators of the 1611 have apparently followed the Latin Vulgate, mostly after the example of Tyndale, sometimes of versions later than his, especially the Reemish of 1582. So this is where you get into that whole, well, it followed the Douay-Rheims. And so that is in its subsequent reprints and modern representations in that footnote number 10. Scrivener's final list of 60 passages contained one verse from his original 1845 work, John 18:1. One reading was mentioned in a dictionary of the Bible, Acts 7:26, and 2 were given in the Cambridge Paragraph Bible, Ephesians 6:24 and 2 Timothy 1:18. Okay, so Chris Yetz has done a lot of homework here, and it's a really good and thorough article. So I'll just check some of these comments. I'll just catch up with them. Okay, so everyone's just chatting. I'll just keep reading. Examination of Scrivener's 60. So numbers 1 to 7. Matthew 10:25, 12:24, and 27. And so what I'll do is I'll just I'll offer a little bit of a critique as well as I go along. So I would put 12:24 and then put a semicolon there and then have 27. That's usually just how it's written in those type of journals. Mark 3:22, Luke 11:15, 18:19. Yeah, sort of like that. That's where 12 and 27, just to make everything uniform. But I don't want to detract from what's being said here. So these places basically have in the Textus Receptus Beelzebul. Okay, so this is the Lord of the Flies. So you might know the name Baal. It appears here. But in the Vulgate, it says Beelzebub. And in the King James, it says Beelzebub. Whoa, shock horror. Is this a Latin intrusion? Scrivener's perspective, the printed Greek text almost consistently read Beelzebub, but the KJV translated it with a B at the end, as it was translated in the Latin Vulgate. Analysis. Luther consistently used Beelzebub, as did all previous English translations. The 1588 pastors and professors of the Geneva French Bible used Beelzebub in Matthew 10:25, but Beelzebub in the other 6 instances. The Reyna's Spanish Bible consistently rendered the name Beelzebub, and Valera largely followed this pattern, except in Mark 3:22, where it used Beelzebub. Diodati's Italian Bible consistently used Beelzebub. Beza's Latin text has Beelzebulum, and while his Greek text reads Beelzebub, so it's clearly showing that he can have this in his Greek, but he's translating it Beelzebulum. Okay, which is very interesting. However, Scrivener later altered Beza's reading in Matthew 10:25 to Beelzebub based on the Complutensian polyglot, and it's got footnote number 12 there, and that is just in his 1881 New Testament. The Greek New Testament, the 1586 Diction Arum Decum Lingurum. Don't laugh at me. Under the word Beelzebub provides a Greek equivalent, Beelzebul, and notes the idol of the Ekronites, by which the name the idol of the fly is signified. Jerome says that Bel, and Baal are all the same for Hebrews, for by these terms an idol is indicated. Zebub, however, signifies a fly, hence Beelzebub, even if the Greeks pronounce it Beelzebul, is understood as the idol of the fly, but it is also used to mean the prince of the demons, that is the chief of the demons. And so we have footnote 13, and it's got a whole bunch of Latin there, which I'm sure you would love to split your sides laughing or roll your eyes out of sheer pity. You don't want to hear me say that. So the Complete Word Study Dictionary, so I'm pretty sure that's Spiros Zodhiates, who's a native Greek speaker, states that Beelzebul is transliterated from Hebrew Baal Zebub. In the Old Testament, it has a Baal and then Zabub, written in Hebrew here, appears 4 times and is typically translated with the B ending in most of the Bible translations. This is very interesting material. Okay. Now, one thing I'd point out, Baal in Hebrew just basically means agriculture. Okay, so it's, you know how it's sort of like they worship the sky, or they were, the rain gods, or, people throughout certain cultures, if it rained, well, God provided the rain, or if it was dry, well, God sent the sun, or it's basically the god of the weather sort of thing. So Baal, and this is coming from a native Hebrew speaker that I used to work with, and he wanted to be a Hebrew linguist, and so we were talking about different names for God and for idols and things. And he was just telling me that basically Baal it's a common word used in Hebrew just for architecture. Architecture. Why did I say agriculture? Sorry, I've got architecture on my mind. It appears 4 times, translated with a B ending in most Bible translations. This is very interesting information. Erasmus retained the manuscript reading in his printed Greek text, but questioned why the Greeks had changed the final B to an L. He speculated that this shift resulted either from Greek grammatical conventions, or since there is little similarity between the letters, possibly an error made by the ears of the scribes. He also referenced Jerome, who asserted that the names Bel, Beel, and Baal all referred to the same idol. Beza, commenting on Matthew 10:25, noted that the manuscript read Beelzebub as found in 2 Kings 1:2. So he's got the reference number 16 there. And it has Theodore Beza Novum Testamentum. So that's his 1598 in his Annotationis. Conclusion. The evidence does not indicate that the KJV translators blindly or solely relied on the Latin Vulgate. However, it is more likely that they considered the arguments of Beza, Erasmus, and other lexical sources. They may also have understood Jerome's reasoning and agreed with the name referred to in the Old Testament, the God of the Flies. So that's interesting, where I've actually just usually said that it's a Latinized way of saying Beelzebub is Beelzebub in the Latin, and that just became commonplace throughout Europe. And so English people used it as well. And it's like, well, we're not going to, if no one knows it as Beelzebub, why would we translate it that way? If no one knows the name Paulos, the way that it's spelt in the Greek, well, you're going to call him Paul. That's how people understand it. And so that's how I've usually argued it, but there's a lot more information here, and so that would warrant its own study. But I think the conclusion is very good, and he's basically saying there's way more to it than this, than what Scrivener's saying. And so the King James translators obviously did this by design. So did they go to the Latin? No, there was way more to it than that. And so, and just the fact that the Hebrew can say Beelzebub, there you go. So, why not? They went to the Hebrew, you know. Mark 13:37. The Textus Receptus are Vulgate quad, KJV what? Scrivener's perspective. The Greek relative pronoun are is plural, whereas the Latin quad is singular. Version analysis. Luther translated it as was, and in brackets here he's got what. Tyndale, the Great Bible, Matthew's Bible, and the Bishop's Bible rendered it that. Among the pre-KJV English Bibles, only the Geneva Bible explicitly reflected the plural sense with those things that. So those things that. The 1588 pastors and professors of the Geneva French Bible allowed the Geneva Bible's plural reading. So what I might do, I might get this verse up, because it can be hard to jump straight into the details without knowing the actual issue. So we've got Mark. I don't know why I'm holding a Greek Textus Receptus in my hand all of a sudden and clinging to the pages. Mark 13:37. Okay, so let's just grab that, maybe in Bible Hub. Here we go. And what I say unto you, I say unto all. Watch. Okay. What I say unto you, I say unto all. Watch. Okay. It looks like most of the modern Bibles sort of follow that anyway, so which would claim to be based on the Greek. Scrivener's perspective, the Greek, yes, I read through that. Luther's translation was or what? Tyndale, Great Bible, Matthew's Bible, and Bishops rendered it that I say unto you, then I say unto all. Hang on. I should read the King James rather than the Good News Bible. And what I say unto you, I say unto all. So it's like, and what I say unto you, so it's, and that I say unto you in some of the earlier ones. Geneva Bible has those things that. Okay, so we're looking at this being plural. So what I say unto you, but that doesn't make it plural or singular. Or what you'd have to do is look at the context. Did Jesus talk about lots of different things? He most certainly did. That would make it plural in context. What I say unto you, I say unto all. Okay, so it's what he's saying unto you, which is plural. Okay, that's interesting. Anyway, I'll keep reading through and see what Christopher Yates has got to say, because I'm trying to make up certain conclusions already, and I haven't got all the information. The 1588 pastors and professors of Geneva French Bible follow the Geneva's plural reading. Coverdale translated the word exactly as the KJV has it. The 1569 Rayner and 1602 Valera also used the plural rendering, aligning with the Geneva Bible. In contrast, Diodati rendered it that which, in a singular sense. So Beza's Latin reflected a plural meaning, while the Nestle-Aland 28th edition, NA 28, adopts the singular ho. Okay, interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to check the Greek behind this. Now, they used to have Beza's 1598 on. If you went to more parallel Greek, it showed you the 1598. They took it off. Maybe it was a bit of a mistake to have it on there. But we do have Scrivener's here and Stephanus's here, which have the same beginning letter there. So we can see Tischendorf has that other reading, and that is matched by Westcott and Hort, Nestle, etc. Okay, but the Robinson Pierpont, they have the same as the Textus Receptus, Greek Orthodox, etc. So there's only that one change. So great point. The word what is not inherently singular or plural, but derives its number from context. So that's what I was saying before. For example, in Revelation 7:13, what is plural? What are these things which are arrayed in white robes? Okay, that's an interesting rendition. In Revelation 3:3, what is singular? Thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. The King James Version also translates as what elsewhere. In Acts 11:9, it has hotheos ekatharase. The KJV renders it what God hath cleansed. Notably, the Vulgate here uses the plural que. So his conclusion is there is no reason to assume that this reading in the King James Version originated from the Vulgate. The English allows for both singular and plural interpretations. Either way, there are also some Greek manuscripts which support the singular ho. Okay, so just going back to how it's read in the English, I'll just quickly look at the King James. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. So it's actually not changed in the modern versions. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. But it's interesting that in the King James it says, what I say unto you. So that's plural. That he's saying unto all. So that would be not just plural in the sense of all the disciples, or that would be to absolutely everyone. Watch. Okay, which is a very interesting concept, because this is in the eschatological chapter in Mark 13. Yeah, and so I think what he's saying here, exactly what I was saying before, the what I say unto you, but perhaps this is regulated because this is plural here. So Interesting. I'll just go up to, okay, that's additional parallel Greek. Sorry, I'm just checking something for my own thoughts here. What I say unto you, human, plural. So to you is plural. I say unto all, passive. Watch. Okay, so perhaps there is some sort of regulation because it is speaking to plural, but it would more so relate to the context of what. But that's the singular. Okay. But yeah, I would agree with Chris. It's like the what is, like it says here, it's not inherently singular or plural, but derives its number out of the context. You have a lexical definition and you have a contextual definition, and this word what, and he's showing other places where sometimes it's plural, sometimes it's singular. So I don't think that we can judge that verse. And isn't it interesting that this is in a place where Westcott and Hort's text differs? And this is what I found with my 190 list. Sometimes he would be basically just waving the flag for a Westcott and Hort reading because he worked with these guys. And so Mark 14:33. So I don't think there's any other footnotes there. So I'm going to answer some of these comments because everyone's talking about Baal a little bit. At Matthew 10:25, Diodati's 1607 Italian Bible footnote says it means God or Lord of the Fly, significa Dio, and it's got the Italian there. So before I go to number 9 here, I'll just read through some of these comments. AD33 is in the house. Ahena says Lord of the Flies. Kept Pure in All Ages says Baal, Lord, Master, Owner. Very interesting. From Google in AI, Hebrew Baal generally means Lord, Master, Owner, or husband. It can refer to a specific Canaanite deity, often depicted as the god of fertility and rain. English may not have been one of FHA's strengths. And that's one thing as well. Some people can be actually good in Greek, but they're not good in English. And so they don't know how to translate. You've got to be an expert in both. And so I've found Scrivener is actually sloppy in Greek as well. Where, like, maybe I still have my page up. I can show you a quick example of a typo. Maybe I can just type in typo. Yeah, here we go. Okay, now that's a typo of the Ephesians 6:23, the Amen. Actually, it would be, I'll just type in error. My article's so big, I don't want to be scrolling through this just to find one word, just to make one little point. Okay, error, Beazel Baal. Okay. Keep going through. Yes, here. So look at this. Scrivener, I mean, clearly anyone looking at this can see that there is an acute symbol here. So you have the breathing mark above the O. You have an acute symbol here, but it's in the line. Now, Scrivener said that it's not in the line, and that's one of his 190. So, but wouldn't you think that he would just look further or know more or just be able to spot this? Because I spotted it, you know, and I'm not an expert, you know, and so so he has Amen. Actually, I've got it written wrong there. No, I don't. He has it like this. So he's saying that the acute symbol is going one way, and yeah, so, but when we look at the 1598, it does have this reading. So he's saying it 1598 has just the breathing mark, but clearly it's got the acute symbol there, which anyone can see there. And so he's basically saying it doesn't have the acute symbol. He's put the acute symbol there, and that's one of the changes in his Textus Receptus. So that's what I'm saying. He's not even that good at Greek. He can't even, like, just a basic typo, he's missing that, where it just makes me question his strengths in the Greek language. So the difference between Beza's is this instead of this. That's what Scrivener's saying. Op means the relatively sometimes demonstrative pronoun who, which, what, that, while ho is simply a definite article. But the reality is in 1598, Beza did not have o. Sorry, he does have the hot there and not this definite article. It would seem that Scrivener missed this and merely assumed that Beza had that. Perhaps the text of Beza from 1569 to 1598 had this as a print error, the axiotonos acute accent in Beza's 1598 is partially hidden by the marginal line. So I think we would all agree. And I've also, I've got, so he has this here saying there's no acute symbol when it is there. And let's look at Stephanus, what he has. Hey, look, he has the same thing here. And so, as I've mentioned here, so it's interesting. But anyway, I'm just sort of trying to prove a point that, some people are like, okay, he didn't know English that well. Yes, he did reprint Beza's 1598, made a few little sprinklings here and there. I think a lot of this is just completely unnecessary because Scrivener just really doesn't have the same type of caliber that the Reformers had. Okay, so the un. So Mark 14, I'll go directly to this verse and we'll read it first because it did seem to help when I went to the verse and looked at it. 43, because sometimes you can get straight into the weeds and you can lose track of what's really going on. Let's go to the parallel. Okay. So the un reading. Okay, I can't see it there. Okay, because it's omitted. Okay, so he's saying it's omitted. Mark 14:43. The Textus Receptus has un. The Latin omits the un, and the King James omits the un. So he's saying, okay, it follows it here in an omission. All right. Scrivener's perspective, the printed TR editions include the verb un, which could be expected to be rendered as in the Geneva Bible, Judas, that was one of the 12. Okay. However, the King James Version omits the verb, as does the Vulgate. Okay. So let's look at the analysis and then I'll comment. Analysis. Luther, Tyndale, Coverdale, and Matthew's Bible all omit the verb, while the Great Bible, Geneva, and Bishop's Bible included. The Reina and Valera Spanish Bibles also retain the verb, whereas Diodati omits it. The Old Latin text and the NA28 critical text similarly do not include un. The only indication from the Bishop's Bible is the marginal cross-reference, Matthew 26:47, Luke 22:47, and John 18:3. And so there's some footnotes there, but I'll catch up with them. I guess it's just going to the NA 28 and to the Bishops there. Both of the synoptic passages in the TR have the identical text and wording, except that neither of them have added the verb. Okay. Conclusion: the KJV does not always translate un. For example, it was omitted in Acts 18:24 and Revelation 5:5. Being that this was in both Geneva and Bishops, the omission in Mark 14:43 likely resulted from the translator's use of a variety of textual sources, including Tyndale and Diodati's 1607 Italian Bible. There are also a variety of Greek manuscripts which do not include the verb, as the synoptic passages do not. If the King James Version translators had merely followed the Vulgate, it might be expected that they would have included Iscariot as the Vulgate does. Okay, so this is a very interesting point, that sometimes what you see is a translation preference. Like, say, for example, you might have utos. Say, I'm just thinking of an example in Matthew 24, I think it's verse 14. It says, the same shall be saved, or they shall be saved. It's sort of like saying the same thing. They shall be saved, or the same shall be saved. But just if you omit it, I think the New King James omits it. It just says, sort of wants you to gather that those people will be saved, but it doesn't mention them. Okay. But sometimes you can do that. You can translate things in a certain way that you don't actually need the word in the sentence. And so just because the Latin also might have this type of thing doesn't mean it's following the Latin. And obviously here there are some that omit it, but there are some that include it, including the Bishop's Bible, which was the draft edition that they were working on. And so I think it doesn't make sense that they're like, okay, we're just going to follow the Latin here. Obviously, they're going to follow that. They have the choice to look at, Luther, Tyndale, Covenant, all these other ones, and the Geneva and Bishops. And what's interesting, Geneva and Bishops include it. So they're making a conscious decision to not include it. So they're going through looking at it, and they're making sure that it's as accurate as possible. And so according to bringing the Greek over into English in those days, it was perfectly fine not to have it. Now let's look at some of the examples. So Judas, that was one of the 12. Okay, let's have a quick look here. So Judas. So immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12. So it's saying that, okay, it's American Standard Bible. I probably shouldn't read that. Judas, one of the 12. So it seems to just match in with the modern versions. And you wouldn't say the modern versions are just following the Vulgate. You know what I mean? It's just a stylistic choice. Look, Judas, one of the 12. English Standard Version, Judas came, one of the 12. Judas, one of the 12. King James, Judas, one. So most of the Bibles are saying exactly the same thing. So he's saying, well, Judas, that was one of the 12. It should have that was. But you don't really need to put that in there. It's implied in when it says Judas, comma, one of the 12. You don't have to have Judas, that was one of the 12. You have to have Jesus, the Messiah, or Jesus, that was the Messiah, sort of thing. It's not the way English would work. So maybe I can go to Textus Receptus Bibles. Oops, I'll go to Textus Receptus Bibles. And we'll just look at these examples. Okay, Textus Receptus Bibles editorial. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be working. Some of the restrictions on these websites are ridiculous. It's saying it's got a privacy error. Actually, that's not going to that website. I don't know what's happening there, but let's go to here. Judas, one of the 12s, Judas, one of the 12. So when people are like, oh, it follows the Latin, does it? Is it following the Latin, or is it just that Scrivener is saying it's following the Latin? And by looking at the introductory material that Christopher Yates has provided, basically it's Westcott and Horde have been, or I think it was Westcott, he was involved with this. He's pointing out that where there's Latin. So I just don't trust these guys. I don't trust that these guys have the ability to know this, and I wouldn't put it past them to be deceptive. So anyway, this Textus Receptus Bibles page is not really coming up, unless I go to Wayback Machine. Let's type it in there. We'll see what comes up. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a lot quicker going this way. Let's go to 2022. We'll go here. It's having a bit of a spaz. Oh, there we go. Snapshot. Okay. Now it doesn't have the same navigational ability, so I might not be able to use it. Let's see. I'll just click on something. Yeah, it doesn't have the indexing at the top. So you have to sort of, here we are, Interlinear Bible. Perfect. Mark 14:43. Mark 14. Oops, it's still loading Matthew 1:1. A. Hannah says, he is like the building inspector that comes to inspect your construction. He's going to find something wrong regardless. Yeah, that's his job. And that's what anyone in construction, what you do is you actually make a huge error, a huge mistake. So everyone focuses in on that. Then they don't nitpick. And so if you've got a piece of timber just hanging down or something like that, it's like, look at this, so you have to go and fix that. Then they're not going to look with a fine-tooth comb over everything and nitpick something. And so you just leave something that's really easy to fix, but it looks terrible. But anyway, let's go back to here. So we're in Mark 14. Oops, 14. And no, this is definitely not working properly. But that's fine. We will just keep moving on. I think you see what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to put all these Bibles together. Maybe my website actually has all that. Sometimes I shock myself as I've already done some of this homework. Mark 14. I'll just quickly grab it. Mark 14, 43. Okay, well, I do have the Textus Receptus already punched in there with coded to Strong's numbers. So maybe I do have something interesting on here. Not really. And none of the English Bibles yet. That's disappointing. And I've got the Arabic and the Basque. A few others. And the Italian, and that's the wrong date. It should say 1607. Okay. Anyway, I feel like I've just hit the mud and I'm spinning my wheels. So let's, so I think it's a good conclusion. One thing that did come to mind, and Ahana says Yetzer is knocking it out of the park. Yes, absolutely. One thing that comes to mind is there is a certain example, I think it's in Mark, where it uses Levi and Jesus, and it interchanges them in the English Bible. Now, when you read through the Greek, and some people have mistakenly said that this is like Jesus is taken out of the text or something like that. But it's actually, no, it actually uses him, and then uses Levi, but then it uses Jesus and him, and it interchanges them. I'm probably not explaining myself properly, but for you guys who study this stuff regularly, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's not just in English. That actually appears in lots of different language editions. It's just one of those things where in the Greek it's completely understandable, but when you translate it, it's like they have to make it so the antecedent is first or something like that, and then it's talking about him rather than it brings confusion because you don't know if it's talking about Levi or Jesus if you just translate it exactly how it is from the Greek. So you have to sort of amend it, and some other languages have to do that too, because the European languages aren't that dissimilar from each other. And oftentimes what happened was with the English language, a lot of the Latin rules, that was what everyone was studying for years and years and years. And English was seen as this, this rough mutt of a dog sort of language. And they were trying to apply Latin rules onto it. And so some of these stuck. And so sometimes that's the amazing thing about the English language is it does have these foreign language rules on it at times. And so sometimes it will have the same grammatical structure, but it eventually morphed into its own thing. But so I think anyone who knows those verses will know what I'm trying to say. So let's look at Luke 1:35. So this is shall be born. I'll get this up. Luke 1:35. So they're saying that the King James is following the Latin Vulgate here. Okay, let's check this one out. The King James says, which is shall be born, okay. Which shall be born of thee. I know the of thee. I think, is it the of thee is deleted? Anyway, there shall be born. Okay, let's check that out. Genomenon, and it has the two news here. It's very important that you have the two news, because if you have one new, it just means a production. If you have two news, it means a birth. And so they're different words. So this is the problem that happens in Matthew 1:1 and Matthew 1:18, where the one in 1:18 has the two news, the one in Matthew 1:1 has one new, but Westcott and Hort, they dropped a new, and it's still translated as birth. So what it did, it actually redefined Matthew 1:1. It redefined a whole bunch of other places in the Bible, probably even here too. If you look at some of the other ones, I'm pretty sure they would all say shall be born. yes, born is the main way of saying it. And I guess this one has two news, but even the one with one new now means born, according to the new kids on the block. So anyway, that's another issue. Scrivener's perspective. Scrivener's only note on this passage is nescitur. He may have been considering either the tense of the verb or the translation. The Latin nescitur is future, whereas the Greek genomenon is present passive participle, is a present passive participle. In some contexts, geneo is rendered conceive, as it is in Matthew 1:20, a reading defended by various writers. So he's got footnote 22 there. Let's just check it out. Oops, I think I skipped a whole page. 22 is comments on by Lorenzo Valla and Desiderius Erasmus at Matthew 1:20. It's very interesting. I'll check out that other footnote. I'll finish this one, and then we'll go back to that other footnote that I missed about Boyce. Beza, in his footnote at Luke 1:35, wrote about the possibility that the Greek verb carried the meaning of conceive rather than to be born, as reflected in his revision of the Vulgate's nescitur to gignator in his Latin text. Analysis. Nearly all pre-KJV Bibles across various European languages translate the verb as born and render it in the future tense. While there is no textual variant for the verb in the NA28, most modern Bibles follow the same pattern. Even though Beza changed the Latin word, he still retained the future sense. The present participle does not always indicate something happening now, but can describe an action in progress within a given context. For example, tomorrow I will go to the store driving my car. Here, driving functions as a present participle, yet the action occurs in the future. In Luke 1:35, the main verbs are in the future tense, which pushes the entire context forward in time, including the participle. Therefore, Scrivener may not have been referring to the tense. Regarding the definition, lexical sources from the 1500s generally defined geneo as begat or engender. Just footnote 23, it says see Ambrogio Calapio, 1586 there, and Geneva Jean Crespin. The complete word study by Spiros Haetes has to beget as spoken of men, to bear as spoken of women, has pass, I guess that's passive, to be begotten or to be born. In Luke 1:35, geneo is passive. Hebrews 11:23 provides a clear example of where geneo carries a sense of birth. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents. Conclusion: both Reformation era and modern translations consistently interpret this passage with a future meaning, choosing birth rather than conception as a valid translation. It does not require dependence alone or at all on the Vulgate. So it seems like this is one of those places where you're just like, what are you doing, Scrivener? Who said this? You know what I mean? Like, what on earth are you going on about? So anyway, I think that's like, as A. Hannah says, Yetzer is knocking it out of the park. But I mean, these are so easy. It's like Scrivener's doing an underarm floater. And he's just like Yetzer's just smashing it out of the park, because there's really no what can you say about that? It actually is a demonstration of the incompetence of FHA Scrivener, unfortunately. If FHA Scrivener was an independent guy, not associated with Westcott and Hort and Unitarians and stuff like that, If he hadn't had all this baggage in his background of wanting to delete all these verses in the King James, we might go, yeah, the Textus Receptus he did, and a few things that he said, we can run with them. But obviously, he's got all this baggage. He's basically critiquing people who are of a way higher caliber than he is. He can't figure out why they've made certain conclusions because he doesn't know Greek that well, he doesn't know Latin that well, and he doesn't know English that well. And also, I would say he doesn't know the Bible that well, because a lot of these things are just contextual. So knowing the context, you go, oh, that's plural or that's singular, So anyway, I think that one's a bit of a no-brainer, but there are some footnotes that I missed. So in the previous one we're talking about, so it has Revelation 5:5, Boyce's notes taken in the process of translating read, that is of the tribe of Judah. Ward Allen transcribing for King James at Penguin Press, 1970. Being that it was in both Geneva and Bishops, my guess is that the removal of it was based on a variety of sources. Possibly one of those was the parallel passages from the other synoptic gospels, Matthew 26:47 and 22:47. And then the other footnotes, he mentions Lorenzo Valla here, and I think I read that. So yeah, that was the footnote that I didn't read, was the John Boyce one at Revelation 5:5, which is interesting. That is of the tribe of Judah. Okay. So let's go down to number 11. Megalia, Vulgate Magna, King James Version, Great Things, Luke 1:49. So we're not that far from it. I'll just get our thing ready. And let's just check this out in the King James. Luke 1:49. For he that is mighty hath done to me great things, and holy is his name. Okay, very good. So let's jump to Luke 1:49. So it says, Scrivener's perspective. Scrivener's only comment is Megala or Magna. Megalia is often translated into Latin more literally as Magnalia or Magnifici, and in English as majestic, wondrous, or marvelous, in contrast to Megala, which is more often translated as magna in Latin and great in English. Beza's Latin text deviates from the Vulgate towards Scrivener's perspective. Okay, so his Latin is going away from the Vulgate towards the Magnificae mecum eget. He has dealt magnificently with me. Okay. So he's got a footnote 24 here, which is Theodore Beza, and that's in the 1598 edition. Beza's footnotes suggest that Mary may have been quoting Psalm 98:1. The King James Version translates the passage as marvelous things in that psalm. In Acts 2:11, the only other instance of Megalia in the Textus Receptus, the King James Version translates it as wonderful works. Scrivener appears to be indicating that he felt the King James Version translators followed Megala, footnote 25, as in the Vulgate, rather than Megalia from the Textus Receptus. So the NA28 does read Megala, but the apparatus also gives a list of sources for the TR reading. Stephanus' 1550 also included in the NA28 reading in the margin. Okay. Analysis. Luke 1:49, all English Bibles up to and including the King James translate the phrase great things. Similarly, Diodorus Diodati's Italian, Valera's Spanish, Luther's German, Dutch Statenvertaling, and the 1588 pastors and professors of Geneva French Bible render it as great things in their respective languages. John Boyce allowed for either translation, that is, he did great things for me, or magnificent things. So I guess just one thing with that little quotation, sometimes when we're reading through John Boyce or reading a marginal note in the King James, if it can have something and then say or something else, that does not always mean that it's equivalent. I would say sometimes it can be it's saying this or it's saying this other thing, which is different. And so that's where sometimes the marginal notes can cause confusion, or people see a marginal note and they're like, it's an alternative reading, where oftentimes it's not. It's a reading that's an old reading that they are not accepting, but they're saying, or it says this. And so sometimes it can, by having hardly any information, it can cause people to have confusion and go, well, it's an alternative, or it's saying the same thing, or these things are equivalent. But perhaps it's not what John Boyce was actually doing, but it might be. And so that's the thing. When I read through them, my alarm bell just goes off and goes, double check that, triple check it, The lexical sources available to the King James translators indicate that great things is not an erroneous translation, but fits within the semantic range of McDowell. The lexicon Sive Diction Aurum Graeco Latinum describes the TR adjective megaleos as magnus verandus, and it's got footnote 27 there, which says, which has got that fancy name that we just said. Magnus it means great in Carlos Magnus, Charles the Great, while Ambrogio Capellino's fancy dictionary, it did not have the exact Greek word. It did provide magnificus, which comes from magnus, great, and ficus, to do, forming an adjective comparable to the adverb beza used in Luke 1:49. Magnificus was defined in English as magnific, that doth great acts. Magnificenta is the noun form, which the same dictionary describes as the doing or achieving of great things. Modern dictionaries describe megalia the same way. The Word Study Dictionary provides great, indwelling, great works or miracles, great, glorious, wonderful, as a substantive with the plural article ta megalia, great things, wonderful works, contemplated as the working of the greatness of God's power and glory. The scripture for all interlinear translates the TR reading as greatness or great things. Conclusion: there is no reason to assume the King James Version is dependent upon the Vulgate here. Most Reformation-era translations render the phrase the same way, and lexical sources from various eras affirm the translation. The phrase great things is well supported both linguistically and historically. You know what I usually do? When people send me a list, here's a list of errors in the King James, I say to them, look, I'll go through the first three. If they're wrong, I'm not even going to be bothered with the rest. Okay, so that's what I usually do. And then I'll go through the first one. No, that's wrong. And I explain it to them, and they're like, oh, well, what about the next one? Go through the next one, show them that it's wrong. And the next one, oh, that's ridiculous. And then I'm just like, well, I can't be bothered with this list of 600 here. I'm not going to spend my whole life doing this just to prove some list from some weird website where someone just had nothing to do for like 6 months and just wanted to point out where there's problems with the King James, but didn't really know the original languages or the original source text or whatever. And so that's what it feels like with Scrivener. And if this was actually like just a list, I would probably give up here. But I do want to read this whole article by Chris Yetzer. And so I think what we'll do is we'll probably get a few more pages down the road, and I'll probably only go for about 3 hours today. But we'll do, part 3, part 4, perhaps 4 parts should do it. But I do want to read through this, because then it's like when someone says, "Oh, the King James has Latin readings," it's like, which one? And we've got so much here that we can jump into. And the thing is, too, what's wrong with that? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that if you replace the Greek with Latin or add to it or subtract from it, that's wrong. But there's nothing wrong with having something equivalent to what the Vulgate has, and of course we go to the Greek, but but that's not really what Scrivener is saying here. He's saying we've overridden the Greek with a Latin reading, and so there's nothing wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong with going to a word that is a Latin word. There's just nothing wrong with that. But anyway, let's go to number 12. Just checking some of these footnotes. No, I think we covered all them. Luke 20:35 has shall be accounted worthy. So Scrivener's perspective, the Greek participle I'm just wondering how to say that. Kata Himonthentes, it's a long word, is an aorist passive. The EMTV provides a reasonable translation. So what I'll do, I might grab that in, where are we? Luke 20:35. I'll grab it and I'll get the exact reading for it rather than rush over it. And we are going to the Greek. And Google Translate is the business. And so if I want to know what a word sounds like, Kataxiothetes. Thetis. Kataxiothetes. I wonder I was struggling with that one. So it's an aorist passive. The EMTV provides a reasonable translation of the expected Greek construction, but those who have been encountered worthy. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 English words. It's a long word, though, and it's got a lot in it. The Vulgate, however, renders it with a future verb, as does the King James Version. Okay. Analysis. All English Bibles up to the King James Version translate this passage in a similar manner as the King James Version. Diodati's Italian, the 1588 pastors and professors of the French Geneva, and the 1638 Dutch Statenvertaling all use the future tense, while Valera's Spanish translation renders it in the past. The aorist participle generally refers to an action that has been completed, but the context determines when it was completed. To illustrate this, consider the idea of driving to the store, where driving represents the aorist participle and the main verb shifts in sense. Past, having driven to the store, she realized she had forgotten her wallet. Present, having driven to the store, she looks for a parking spot. Future, after she will have driven to the store, she will pick up the groceries. In each case, driven describes a completed action, but its timing is dependent on the main verbs, the main verb or the main verbs. The aorist participle indicates that something is completed or will be completed prior to the time established by the main verb or the broader context. While the main verb in Luke 20:35 is aorist, the context clearly refers to a future event. This is further supported by the presence of present tense verbs, neither marry nor are given in marriage, which suggests that Jesus was speaking as though he had transported his audience into the future. The same pattern occurs in Mark 12:25, where an aorist participle is followed by present tense verbs. In both cases, the King James Version translators appear to be clarifying the future context by rendering the opening participle in the future tense. Footnote 29 says, thanks to Jordan Krikeli for some of his advice on this material. Okay, so that's very interesting that he is involved with that missionary to Uganda. Conclusion: the passage refers to a future event describing those who at the time will be worthy. This does not imply that there were never any worthy in the past, but rather that they became worthy at some point before that future moment. The King James Version's rendering does not necessarily limit the worthiness to a future acquisition, only to a future possession of it. It seems likely that the King James Version translators chose this option to provide English readers with a clearer sense of the passage's future context. So again, it's not to do with the Vulgate, So Numbers 13-16. So we've got Luke 23:34, Matthew 27:35, Mark 15:24, John 19:24, where the Textus Receptus has kleron, the Vulgate has sortes or sortum, and the King James Version has lots. Scrivener's perspective. Scrivener appears to suggest that the Vulgate's use of the plural sortes in Luke 23:34 may have influenced the King James Version translator's choice to use lots in all four verses he listed. Okay, so analysis. The Greek of the Textus Receptus consistently uses the singular kleron, lot, when it is followed by the verb to cast, ebalon. So casting a lot, okay. And that would seem to be would that be an idiom? The King James Version, in turn, consistently translates this phrase as cast lots. By the 1600s, the standard English expression for this action was cast lots, while the singular lot typically referred to the individual one that was drawn or chosen. The Vulgate, however, is not consistent. It uses the plural sortes in Luke 23:34 and lacomen in John 19:24, but uses the singular sortum in other instances listed by Scrivener. Notably, the King James Version also translates Psalm 22:18 as cast lots, even though the Hebrew, LXX, and Latin all use the singular. This suggests that this phrase in the King James, this suggests that with this phrase, the KJV translators were guided more by established English usage than by any specific translation variation. Cast lots or cast a lot. To me, it sort of sounds like it's an idiomatic expression. But anyway, the conclusion here says it is likely that the KJV translators followed the conventional English phrasing cast lots as the standard term for the action rather than adhering to singular or plural forms of the specific text. Given that the Vulgate itself alternates between singular and plural in these passages, 2 of the 6 use the plural, it is unlikely that the KJV was merely copying the Latin. And so it's almost like a no-brainer, isn't it? Once this material is just shown to you, you're like, yeah, if the Latin if it's all over the place with the Latin, why would you assume they followed it? They don't follow the irregularity of the Latin, do they? So anyway, it's a bit of a no-brainer. So number 17, Luke 23:46, parathesomai, Vulgate, commendo, King James Version, I commend. Scrivener's perspective. The Textus Receptus contains the future tense verb parathesomai, but Scrivener wrote that the King James Version's rendering aligns more closely with the present tense paratethomai. That's one thing my wife hates about the English language. She speaks very, very good in English, but is that sound? Thursday. I'm thirsty, like the where if you ever listen to people from Pakistan, India, usually that they say I'm thirsty. It's Thursday, or that they'll just say a T, because it's a bit like doing a guttural Arabic, like or something like that. It's sort of seen as like uncool to do that, but she does it. But it's just one of those things, which is an interesting concept. Because when I was teaching my nephew how to count, I got to 13 and 14, and he kept saying 13 and 13. 13 and 13. And I was like, no, 13, 14. And then I'm realizing I'm like teaching something like they never say that type of thing. And it's like, I guess it's like a glottal stop or a strange sound. Anyway, it's a bit of trivia. So analysis. All Reformation era translations were consulted in this study. They render this verb in the present tense. The 1638 Dutch Statenvertaling Bible includes a footnote acknowledging the future tense as an alternative in the margin of Stephanus's 1550 Greek New Testament. 4 manuscripts are cited as containing the present tense. Footnote 30 says 3 of Stephen's manuscripts read parathemai, Codex Beza, minuscule 4, minuscule 6, and 1 reads parathemai, minuscule 38 and question mark. Beza altered the Vulgate's commendo to depondo, okay, and I deposit parathesomai, or I commend, that is sunistamai, but that is more proper and more suitable to the meaning of the passage. And it's got a whole bunch of Latin there that Beza said. The KJV translator John Boyce wrote, instead of commendo, I commend. Others have depondo, I laid down, but I see no sufficiently just reason for that change. So that was John Boyce. Okay. And so the other footnote that I'll go to is completely in Latin, 1598, so I won't read it when we get to it. So Beza, he altered the Vulgate's commendo to depondo and noted in his footnote that Erasmus's Latin translation used the future tense. For even in Psalms 31:6, from which these words of Christ are derived, it read, and I'm just trying to read it. I won't butcher that. In the future tense. Otherwise, it is true that in all times the Jews were familiar with the permutations. The matter itself shows that the meaning of the present tense fits better. footnote 32, which I won't read. Beza then cited two variant readings mentioned in the Stephanus's margin. The NA28 adopts the present tense verb. Conclusion. Beza's preference for the present tense was not based on the Vulgate, and there is no reason to assume that the KJV translators depended on it either. So very interesting. Lots of homework there. And the conclusion is no Vulgate reading. So John 7:9, TR there. Vulgate is omitted and the King James is omitted. I mean, are there. It's like this, like sometimes in a sentence it can have four this, and one of them is not translated. Scrivener's perspective, the King James Version omits the Greek conjunction there, as does the Latin Vulgate. Analysis. Scrivener accurately points out that the KJV does not translate the Greek conjunction there. The word when is understood as part of the verb, as seen in similar passages like Mark 6:49 and 12:14, where the KJV clearly places that before the when of the participle. Most translations do not render every Greek conjunction, and none of the English versions prior to the KJV translated that in John 7:9. So it's like Scrivener saying this is an issue in the King James, but every other edition does it. The same conjunction appears in the NA28, yet modern translations like the NET and LSB do not render it. The net maintains a structure similar to the King James Version, and in its eSword module with Strong's numbers, does not assign a number to when, though it does not provide a footnote explaining the omission. By contrast, Reformation-era translations and other languages do not include there in John 7:9. The 1588 pastors and professors of the Geneva French Bible, 1607 Italian Diodati, and the 1602 Valera Spanish all translated as and in their respective languages. Conclusion. The King James Version also omits the in Matthew 2:3, 9, 10, 14, 3:1, 5:31, 6:27, 8:1, 10, 16, 9:16, etc. The omission does not necessarily indicate dependence on the Vulgate, as omitting or including there is a common translational choice. And as I said, there is a very, very common word. And so having it omitted, like say in Matthew 1, it's like, Abraham egenesenton Isaac. Isaac the egenesenton Yaakov. Yaakov the egenesenton. It's in every single part of when it's talking about from one generation to another. And it has there. And it's not translated. I don't think any of them are translated. It has and Abraham. It might be translated as and. But in a modern context, many times we use things like the Oxford comma, or we have certain groupings. And so you might have a list of the 12 disciples, where in the King James it might have, Peter and Andrew and John, and it goes through this and thing, where in modern English we'll just have Peter, comma, John, comma, and it omits all the. Or if it's a K, if it's just a conjunction, many of these are omitted. And so, and sometimes in foreign language Bibles, they don't have them either. So that's just the way it is. Just checking some of these footnotes. I don't think I need to. No, I was not going to read those. So number 19. So we're getting through it. We're about probably just under a quarter of the way there. So I'll go for maybe another 20 minutes. Hilly Billy says, I would tend to agree with the idiomatic assessment. A good example is Esther. The celebration of what she did is recalled as Purim lots in Hebrew, wherein she cast no literal lots, but rather took her chance or rolled the dice. Okay, very interesting. So she took a chance. Very interesting. John 10:6, Textus Receptus, poimne, which in the Vulgate is ovile, or in the King James Version is fold. Okay. Poimne. Poimne. It should be an E. I keep saying it A, the older Rasmarian pronunciation coming through. Poimne. Maybe I should just go to John 10:16. And Bible Hub. Go throw that into Google Translate and see how it sounds. Pimni. And so, Scrivener's perspective, the Textus Receptus uses the word for flock, but the King James Version translates it as fold, just as the Vulgate did. Now, this seems to overlap with one of the 190. I'm pretty sure if I go to, was it John 10:16? I'll just go down in my article to John 10:16. No, maybe I can type in fold. Actually, maybe I've actually got it as an article by itself. John 10:16. Sometimes I've already done the homework on these things. No, it doesn't look like I've done it there. I know I've done it somewhere. Actually, I think it's just looking at. I've done this homework just looking at the translation, because people have said flock and fold. Well, they're an error, So going through, it was basically just going through the English and looking at those. So Scrivener's perspective, the TR uses the word flock, but the King James Version translates it as fold, just as the Vulgate did. Analysis: the English Bible tradition varies in its rendering of John 10:16. Tyndale, Coverdale, and Matthew's Bible all use flock, whereas the Bishops and Great Bible opt for fold. The Geneva Bible, possibly aiming to retain some of the Greek wordplay in pime, ace, pimen, translates it as one sheepfold and one shepherd. Meanwhile, most foreign language translations preferred flock in their languages. However, Reina Valera's Spanish version opted for fold chorale, as did both editions of Rustichi's 1562 Italian Bible. I've never heard of that Italian Bible. That's interesting. And earlier editions of the Protestant French Bible, such as Olivetan, and he's got a footnote to 33 here, which is Rustichi's 1562 Italian editions and the French Olivetan, were all consulted online with scanned copies of these specific years. So the next footnote was online scan. The next, I'm just looking through some of these footnotes because I don't think I need to keep going down to them, and they all seem like they're just referencing the work. So let's keep going. But I do feel like I've already written on this somewhere. So I'm going to go back to my article. I'm going to type in sheep. No, it doesn't come up. Maybe if I type in sheep and fold, New King James Version. Okay, it looks like it became an issue in the New King James fold. Okay, so New King James in Micah 2:12 says Bozrah as the flock in the midst of their fold, but then it translates together like the sheep of the fold, and then it has in the midst of their pasture. So Bozrah is translated as pasture. It's not really relevant. So anyway, for some reason, yeah, I've done a study on this. I don't know where I've got it, but okay, so I won't go to any more of these. There's so many footnote references here, but that's great. Best to have all these footnote references. Italian Bible, earlier editions of the Protestant French Bible, such as Olivetan's, nevertheless, the Old Latin, and citations by Clement of Alexandria, Cyprian, and Augustine offer some support for the Old Latin reading of flock. Scholars of the Greek text also varied in their opinions. Lorenzo Valla supported the translation flock, writing rather one flock. Erasmus concurred for Greeks. Pliny, I'm probably saying that wrong already. Where's my little thing? I didn't delete it, did I? Here we go. Google Translate. Pliny. So it's got the M and the N. Pliny. Erasmus concurred. For the Greeks, Pliny is more a flock than a fold. Yet despite this, he constantly retained unum alve, one fold, in his own Latin translation. Theodore Beza conversely defended the Vulgate's choice in his footnote, by which word not the flock, Grex itself, but the sheepfold, ovium stabulum, is intended, which was scarcely ever one, and not only falsely but also foolishly and shamelessly placed in Rome. However, in his Latin text, Beza opted for flock. Regarding the theological implications of John 10:16, John Calvin wrote, that is, that all the children of God may grow into one body, as we do all confess one Catholic faith. One body must of necessity have one head only. There is one God, saith Paul, one faith, one baptism. Therefore we must be one, as we are called into one hope, Ephesians 4:4. And although this flock doth seem to be divided into diverse folds, yet are the faithful which are dispersed throughout the whole world enclosed with common hedges. Because the same word is preached unto all, the same sacraments are in use, there is the same forms of prayers, and those things which are requisite in the profession of faith mark the means whereby the flock is gathered together, namely when there is one shepherd of all and his voice is heard. The meaning of which words is this: when as the church is subject to Christ alone, is subject to the government, and taketh heed unto his doctrine, and is the estate thereof well ordered. If the papists can show us any such thing among them, let them enjoy that title of church whereof they boast so much. And if Christ be silent there, his majesty be trodden under foot, his holy ordinance mocked. What other thing is their unity but a devilish conspiracy that is worse and more execrable than all disorder and flattening abroad? Therefore, let us remember that we must always begin at the head, for which cause when the prophets do describe the restoring of the church, they do always enjoy David the king with God, as if they should say that there is neither any church where God doth not reign, neither any kingdom of God where the honor of the shepherd is not ascribed unto Christ. Similarly, Lutheran theologian Niels Hemington wrote, the third place is of Christ's sheep and of their mark, that there is but one sheepfold and one shepherd. The sheep of Christ are all they that bear, or all they that bear Christ, and the sheep do follow him in true simplicity, innocence, meekness, and obedience. Neither are there any other remarks to know Christ's sheep by than devotion toward God, charity toward our neighbor, pureness of conversation, and a certain holy carefulness and forwardness in our vocation. And whereas he saith he hath other sheep that must be brought into the same fold, he meaneth that there is one holy Catholic Church of the Jews and Gentiles together, and wherewithal he expresseth the manner how the sheep shall be brought together, when he saith, and they shall hear my voice. The preaching of the gospel, therefore, and the believing of the gospel when it is preached, causeth us to be gathered into Christ's sheepfold. The Geneva Bible footnote summarizes their theological perspective. The certain mark of the Catholic Church throughout all the world, which hath one head, that is Christ, the only keeper and only shepherd of it. Diodati's 1607 Italian Bible echoes the same sentiment. Indeed, the elect from among the Gentiles that should be by means of the gospel gathered into one and the same universal church, which with the elect from among the Jews. The King James Version provides a marginal reference liking John 10:16 to Ezekiel 37:22. So we'll read that in context. Ezekiel 37:19 to 24. Say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be to them all. And there shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. And David my servant shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. From the Catholic side of the debate, French Jansenist Antonier, he's got the most awesome name, so I won't butcher it, downplayed the significance of the translational variant, arguing that either reading supports the same theological conclusion. For the question is not whether theologians used this passage, citing it according to the Vulgate to prove the unity of the Church. It is admitted to him that they do so, and that they are right to do so, because the words unum olve, onefold, can easily be understood in the same sense as unus rex, one flock. I maintain that Mr. Moore cannot name a single theologian who has used this passage to prove that there is one true church by insisting on the word olve, fold Latin, or Berg, Gary, fold French, and rejecting Grex, fold Latin, or Trupeu, fold French, as if the latter would take away all the force of his argument. He further theorized why French Protestants had retained fold in their translations. It could only have been because it seemed to them quite indifferent. In linguistics, diminutives frequently retain the core meaning of the original word while adding nuance of smallness or affection. In English, diminutives are normally formed by adding suffixes like let, booklet, or i.e. doggy, or y dolly, or by using words like little or mini. In Greek, the diminutive is often made with the suffix ion. For example, the diminutive vivlos, book, is bivlaridon, which in Revelation 10:2 is translated in the King James Version as little book. Because diminutives usually maintain a sense of the original, a dolly is still understood as a doll, and a booklet is still a type of a book. The diminutive of the Greek word for flock, pini, let me play that again, pini, is pinonen, which is used in Luke 12:32 alongside the adjective for small. Together, the King James Version renders them as little flock, which reflects the affectionate tone of the diminutive. It is akin to how a young girl might call her toy, my little dolly. The Greek diminutive of flock is defined in the 1562 lexicon, fancy Greek name there, as shepherd, herd, flock of sheep. It is also the word used in the LXX to render the Hebrew term for enclosure, pen, or fold in Psalm 50, verse 9, in the LXX 49, verse 9. So I'll just check some of these footnotes here. It seems to be a lot in Latin, and I don't think anything is really worth looking at unless you want to keep studying through that. I'll probably just finish this one, and then I think I'm going to exhaust myself. Another effect of speech is contenes pro contento, the container for the thing contained. In Henry Petcham's highly praised treatise on rhetoric entitled The Garden of Eloquence, he explains the use of metonymy as a form of speech whereby the orator putteth one thing for another, which by nature are knit together. He then lists 4 ways this occurs: the cause for the effect for the cause, the subject for the adjunct, and the adjunct for the subject. Petcham goes on to describe each case. Under number 3, he gives 4 categories: the possessor for the thing possessed, time put for things done in time, 3, place put for things it containeth, 4, the container for the thing contained. Number 4 is the one of interest here. In modern English, it appears in certain phrases as well. The White House issued a statement, or he drank the whole bottle. In these cases, the White House and bottle are supplied for the thing contained outside, that is, the people or the liquid. Petcham gives 2 examples from Scripture. It is not the cup of blessing which we bless, is not the cup of blessing which we bless the communion of the blood of Christ. In that example, the apostle putteth the cup for the contents of the cup. Another, there shall be one fold and one shepherd, that is, one company or flock. The previously mentioned Antonia Arnaud, that fancy name that I couldn't say, also explains the variant here with the continens pro contento, how easily it is to have taken Olvier. Sorry, I'm reading that. That's like full dyslexia. What a horrible word to say. Yeah, can you write down the problem that you've got? It's like dyslexia. It's torture. So it's ovile. So I'm trying to read a Greek letter there in a Latin thing. Ovile, fold. For a tropeu flock, by a very common figure of speech called continens pro contento. Conclusion. So finally we got to the end of this one. That was like a wall of text. The use of fold in John 10:16 was rendered by the Reformation era Lutherans and Calvinists. While the original interpretation may have been influenced by the Latin Vulgate, it was not the sole factor in the King James Version translator's decision. Perhaps Arnauld's sentiment regarding the French versions would apply to the King James Version. Possibly they rendered fold from the Bishop's Bible because they discerned no substantive difference. The Oxford English Dictionary lists two senses that may apply to the context of John 10:16. Number one, B, figurative, especially in a spiritual sense, and 1C, the sheep contained in a fold. For 1C, it gives three examples: the 1669 wordage, and it has, I'm not sure what cyst is or Auric is. 1681, 219, to run the fold over it and well settle it. The 1697 Dryden Berg passed. 773 the bleating fold. 1742 Collins, I guess it's ecological. Till late as Silent Eve, she penned the fold. Even in the 17th century, as Arnauld noted, the term sheepfold and flock was sometimes used interchangeably. Samuel Johnson's 1755 dictionary also lists the fold of the sheep as a definition. In fact, many modern dictionaries still give the definition of fold as sheep. So it's a lot of homework done there. That goes for several pages, but I think John 10:16, you can see that it's not just, well, the King James guys were like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, let's just go to Latin. Or like James White says, they didn't really know Greek, they were more so skilled in Latin. But then he'll say in his next point, oh, they were experts in Greek. And it's like, okay, whatever. But I think we've gone to, so the next one is John 12:26. Let's just do that one. It's so tiny. I just feel like that one was like massive, and we just want to continue on. C.S. Lewis wrote probably the best books on rhetoric. It is a systematic, not alphabetical lexicon of the rhetorician's terms with clear definitions and examples. I think one could really learn the art from this book, C.S. Lewis. Okay, interesting. Oxford English Dictionary and a few other things there. So John 12:26, the Textus Receptus has K. The Vulgate omits that, and the King James omits it. Shock horror. The K is not in the King James. It's not translated. Scrivener's perspective, the Textus Receptus includes the conjunction K after este, but this is not reflected in the Latin Vulgate or the King James Version. Analysis, Tyndale, Coverdale, Matthew's Bible, Geneva Bible, and all include that. So they all included the and, whereas the Great Bible, Bishop's Bible, did not. Most standard Reformation era foreign language Bibles also retain the conjunction, though the Spanish the Valera Spanish Bible omitted it. The current NA 28 also excludes it. Okay, interesting. So conclusion, as noted in number 18, Greek conjunctions are not always translated. For instance, see the King James Version rendering of Matthew 8:8, 8:9, 11:4, etc. The omission of K in the King James Version does not necessarily indicate dependence on the Vulgate, as such conjunctions are at times left untranslated based on contextual, linguistic, or historical considerations. And so most of the time they've brought everything they need to bring across in English, and so trying to add in the K there can cause it to be it can be a stylistic thing, but it's an unnecessary thing to put in. at times. And so I think that's a very good point. And so the next one that we will get on to next time is John 18:1. And that seems like one that stuck around from Scrivener's early days. So Scrivener wrote several books, and it seems like John 18:1 was one of those ones that sort of stayed in there. The Kedron. I've gone through this issue. I feel like I've actually, because one of the things is when I did my 190 list, I did go through some of these Latin ones just out of curiosity and just quickly look them up. But I don't think I've got the homework anywhere. But I mean, I can always look it up. Maybe I've actually done it. John 18:1. I'll go to my website. Let's have a look. John 18:1. No, nothing written there. I guess just because I've gone through the KJV 2023 edition, and I forgot that you guys can't see me there. I'll just reveal myself. So John 18:1. So I would have had to have done this homework when I was going through that. So that's probably what I'm referring to. 81. The brook Kidron. Yeah. It's a bit of another nothing burger. Anyway, Hilly Billy says, I think fold comes from a pen or an enclosure for a sheep fold. Yes, that makes sense. So anyway, guys, I've gone for 3 hours. I think that's enough for our first, this is our second video in this series, but our first look at Christopher Yetz's material. I'm glad that I'm reading through this. There's lots of details. I'm learning a lot going through this. And so we will continue on. Now, hopefully, if I start next time without a huge, hour-long introduction, we can get maybe 3 hours done. We might even be able to finish it. So let me just quickly scan through and just see if there's any other tricky things. It just seems to just continue on through till we get to 60. Oh, there's a little bit of a table there. I guess it's Christ Jesus or Jesus Christ. Interesting. But I'm really thankful to Christopher Yetzer for doing all this research. That is a lot of work. I know how much time that takes because I've done my 190 list, which is huge. It just goes on forever. I still haven't completed it. But anyway, guys, I'll continue this another day. It mightn't be for a few days. So I'm going to shut this down, play my little outro. God bless you guys, and we'll see you again soon.